I think where I am in my region, it's discounted. Like, because I think we pick players sometimes based off of who we think they are, in the season, and we don't. I don't recall very often we talk about character. Never. I mean, we don't really talk about the character of the kid, although that might sway how I feel about the player in my rating. But on paper, the actual looking at the player in that period of time, are we picking them because they're the best players or because they fit a role? And I think that is that's a debate I think that I love hearing about, because it's always a dilemma for me picking these 14 and 15-year-old kids of, are we picking them for what they are right now, this very second in time, or are we picking them for what we think they're going to project to be? And I think that's where we miss a lot of kids. Like I joked around the last camp we just did a couple of weeks ago, and we had one evaluator said, "Oh, I love this kid. He back checks ferociously. He's always getting back to the puck." I go, "Yeah, but he's the right defenseman. So your best back checker in the camp is a right defenseman." I said, "I don't know if that's, to Jordan's point, like, I don't know if we're even noticing the fact that this kid's really not purely a defenseman. He's a great dynamic player, but where does he fit the role if we're picking 6D?" So I think those middle discussions are always going to be the debate, right? And I think at the professional level, Tim, and the Olympic level for the rest of you guys, that's like, that's the science. That's the key of saying, wow, I think I can find a kid based off of little tendencies that all the coaches are giving me in who this player is, as opposed to me looking at that player by myself and not understanding all the context around them.
Just as sort of a side note, like Hockey Alberta, a couple things. They're very, very clear with all of their coaches and mentors. They have an Alberta built pyramid with all the, the qualities they think make up a very good player. And character is a big, 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 big piece of that for them. It's always part of the discussion, like attitude, the quality of teammate, commitment, all that sort of thing. So character is a big piece of their evaluation. The second thing is they are very, very clear in this process that we're in, because it's an introduction to short-term competition, really, as Wally mentioned, projecting forward to the national junior team on the men's side and the national camps on the women's side, and eventually the national women's team. They're very, very clear that when they players come into a selection camp, your prior body of work is irrelevant. You need to perform on this Friday, on this Saturday, on this Sunday, in order to have the best chance to make the team. And they go to great lengths to hide the actual names of all the players. Now, some of the coaches will obviously know who some of the players are, but there are no names. There are numbers and colors, and the coaches are tasked with evaluating how the player is performing in this moment. And it definitely has happened in the past. And I believe Brent Sutter's son is case number one, where he was one of, if not the top 14-year-old in the province, and he did not get selected one year, selection camp weekend. And I don't know the whole story there, and I don't want to cast aspersions. He's a pretty darn good NHL player right now, and obviously was a good player. But they go to great lengths to try to evaluate based on, what are you doing for me right now? It's not about who's going to be good down the road. It's not about, it's about the moment, and can you be a good teammate and a good player on demand, so to speak. So there's different, obviously different goals and different processes for every different situation, but that's what this process is. And it's an interesting one for sure.
Yeah, Tim, I think that's really important, right? That if you're doing whatever evaluations, whoever is running that, to give those distinct, directions, and know that, like, I know I've been to many evaluations where if you don't say this, the 10 people evaluating, this is the criteria you're picking on, and this is how we weigh your decision. And I'm very conscious about, like, I don't sit with other evaluators, I don't sit with other scouts, I don't sit with other coaches, I don't discuss a player's history. I want to know who the player is from my eyes. If I'm wrong, I'm wrong. If I missed a kid, like, I've missed kids at the camp. Like, I know we didn't pick a kid, very similar story. We didn't pick a kid at New York State camp that had already committed to Providence College. Like, he was committed and done. And we're like, how do you not pick that kid? I go, well, because we're evaluating on these last 4 hours of what we're seeing, and clearly out of 10 coaches, 8 didn't pick him. So there must be something wrong with the player, or all the evaluators stink. And that's fine too, right? If you want to make that argument. But I think to the point of, make the determination. Are you picking for? Is your selection process going to be body of work? Is it going to be the snapshot in today's day? Is it going to be, how do you project? If it's not about projection, it's about tomorrow. We're having a team. We're having a game. Who's on your team? That's a different way of looking at a player.
Yeah, and projection, and selecting for development because you think they can be a good player down the road. That is a crapshoot. No one knows what somebody is going to become. Of course, you can look at all the traits they have, and obviously character becomes a big part of that. The guys that are, and the women that are real character people, are really going to have a better chance of developing themselves and enhancing their skills down the road. But, where is somebody going to be 5 years from now? Nobody can know. And anybody that says they do is lying to themselves, really, because you really don't know. There's all kinds of things that go into that sort of development process, including exposure to good coaches, both skill coaches and general coaches, and how they develop as a individual, mature in terms of their maturity, and all those things are really, really important. So
yeah, and it's funny that you say that too, because I think what we're seeing in the youth hockey world is that evaluation, like magic, that somebody thinks they can identify somebody, is happening earlier and earlier and earlier. And I think that's really what a disservice to all these families and children, that you actually think that you can project a 9-year-old and future success without projecting all of 9-year-olds and giving them all the path for success. It's funny how you're seeing a lot of experts of 7 and 8-year-old evaluators determining the path of a lot of kids.
Yeah, amen. Go ahead, Kim and/or Wally.
I'll jump in. Yeah, I think it's interesting what you said. Mike, I laughed a little bit, right? Because like, if I use that superstar in the U11 AA team, like, guess what? She's going to be a really good hockey player, but like, her grandma can see that. Like, it's not the top end kid you need to like, oh yeah, they're the next one. Really? Oh, okay, good job. Like, anyone could have picked Sidney Crosby out of a lineup, right? But I think it's interesting, and again, I only deal with the girls. I do find the evaluation process and the tryout process, especially at the younger age groups, to be fraught with challenges, because they get nervous. They know you're there, right? I have this debate with all of our coaches, and kind of going, well, what are our best practices in terms of player evaluation, right? And, telling the player you're coming, is always, a debate. Like, do I tell them I'm there? With our newer coaches who no one knows what they look like, and then you get all the parents going, well, has Billy even seen my team play? I'm like, you don't know what Billy looks like, but Billy's smart enough to know he wasn't going to text you that he's coming, because Billy wants to see what your daughter looks like on just a Tuesday night game. He doesn't want to know what she looks like when you know Billy's coming, right? But I do think that's, and your term body of work is exactly the right term, Mike, is, we are doing these kids a disservice if we aren't looking at least getting a couple different vantage points, right? Like we need information. With our association, most players are coming internally, right? So moving up and around internally. So we need information from their previous coach. We need information from these more objective evaluations we've done in the past. We need to see, and it's crazy that we don't necessarily even have this. Where did she play last year? Where was she 3 years ago? Right? Like you actually need to see, if she was a AA player who's now tracked down to B, like that says something that versus whether it went the other way. And I think it's just, like everyone's talking about, it's just having that information available to make it debatable, to have a conversation, right? And I think what we're finding is that there's just not a process, or there's no standardization of the process. The families are wanting more, the coaches are wanting more, and you could overdo it, but I do think there's some pretty low-hanging fruit in terms of having some sort of objective evaluation, some sort of feedback from their current coach, some sort of, years-long tracking of where they've been, right? And even if we could just empower our coaches with that information, they're going to be way further along, right, in terms of where we want to be. I don't think we're ever going to go to, third-party evaluators pick the team, because I constantly put myself in that situation in the 15 years I coached. I don't know that I want anyone picking my whole team for me. We might have done better though, who knows? But so I don't know that I certainly don't want to be picking 32 rep teams, nor do I have the time to pick 32 rep teams. But if I was forced to, I'd probably get it 85% right, just based on what I know, right? But then the coaches are going to have a mutiny, right? So I do think there's some autonomy. And, I think, Mike, you talked about it earlier, right? Often we have multiple teams playing at the same level, right? So we have 3 U18B teams, right? And if you're slotting, maybe the B level is not the right level to talk about it, because maybe you're not slotting kids in at B, they're just picking where they want to go. But if we had multiple teams at the A level, can you really say you've got to go play for Coach X? If you and your daughter like Coach Y better, they're paying the money. Can we really tell them? Like, if those two coaches are really that different, they don't have to play for that person. They can decide they like ballet better and go to house league, or they can decide they like organization down the street better. I think that's a sticking. I just don't know how you do that, or if that's actually feasible in minor hockey to say, if there was multiple teams at the same level, if you had 2 A teams, there was A red and blue, or B blue and black. You can't force them onto one team. They're the customer. They're going to buy what they want. So that's the only part for us. And because we do have so many instances of 2 teams at the same level, because we have so many players, that is, to me, from a player selection, I just don't know that you could ever do that. This standardized process might only work at AA and A, where we have fewer teams. But I'd love to hear if anyone has any insight on that. Like, Mike, it sounds like you've had experience where you kind of slot people in a place. Like, what if they don't like that coach? Or what if, is there any wiggle room, or how does that work?
Yeah, Wally, did you have your hand up? Did you want to go first?
Go ahead, Mike. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I think your point is exactly what I was trying to say. Like sometimes it's best to slot the kids in where they're most comfortable and where they're going to develop the most. And that might be with a certain coach, right? That maybe one coach is a better fit for them. And my point was having those conversations instead of just like here, if you get picked for the AAA team, you get picked whether you like it or not. Like you're like here, it's crazy, right? You have to sign a contract and say you're trying out for my team, my organization. You're coming in, there's 95 kids on the ice. That you're signing a contract that wherever we place you, you're taking a spot on one of those 3 teams, whether it's the AAA, the AA, or the A, whatever you want to call it. Right? And if you leave, you're obligated to fulfill that financial commitment. So it's a little crazy where now you're in and you say, no, you didn't make the AAA team. Well, you guys don't know what the hell you're talking about. Well, you came here thinking we did know what we were talking about. Now you're on the AA team, and this is why we placed you on the AA team. You can't take your ball and run to another organization legally within the commitment. So so my point was, well, if we had the conversations to people prior to and tell them why we're putting them on certain teams and how that fit is better for their child, that conversation maybe is a healthier conversation for the player, the parent, and the coach. Because Kim, I agree with you. Like, I've been in so many organizations over 30 years as an independent evaluator picking teams. And I'm like, well, why do you have me picking the team? I don't know any of these kids. I can tell you who's the best skater. I think that kid's the best skater. Oh, we do too. Okay, what the hell you need me for? Like, don't you need the person that's not independent to be the one that's saying what's great and what's not great about certain players and families and who fits into your program the best? And Wally, you know these guys because you've worked with them now, but that's Kim, the power player guys are exactly the system that they put in place for this concept that you'd be able to just punch out and say, okay, I want the coach of the AAA team from last year to spit out his roster ranked, and here's all the players, and here's what I think about them. And now as I'm an evaluator looking at the next level saying, oh, Kim coached this girl last year. Look, wow, she loves this girl. She gave her a 5 in, intensity, work ethic, culture, and here's where she thought she lacked. And one of the things she thought she lacked was skating, and we're seeing that too. Wow, you're really not a polished skater. Like, that's something we can work on. So I think that's where, to your point, are you trending? Which way are you trending? And are there tools out there at the youth level that help us determine trends? And then probably different than you, Kim, because it sounds like you have a very, you're looking at this from a professional developer lens. But most organizations, 80% of the ones that are doing this, are made up of dads and moms that are, accountants and painters and electricians, and like they're not professional evaluators. They're just looking out there, kind of blind. And I would venture to say too that there's a lot of independent evaluators that come in that don't understand the role that they play either. They just say, yeah, I'll evaluate. Those are your 5 best. Those are your 5 worst. Here's the kids in the middle. Hey, thanks a lot. I appreciate you doing that for me. So I don't know. There's so many different ways to do it, but I think the best way, me personally, the best way at the youth hockey level is the personal knowledge of the player and what they do for you and your organization and team, regardless of how good or bad they might be. Wally, sorry.
Now go ahead, Wally.
I just wanted to mention, Kim, it all gets back to your initial story. You had 2 teams achieve bronze medals, and they both selected their group differently. But I think they both coached similarly. So I don't think the selection process is a big deal unless you're doing it for the sake of developing the people selecting. They get to talk about things. We think we know what we see. We think we know what we're doing, but we have no idea of how they're going to develop. And so, Kim, the example to me is I'd rather have a team given to me than pick a team. And I'll work with it. And just like the coaches you had, they work with their team, both good coaches, different ways, but they transmitted belief and got results out of the group. And I think I run this right up to the NHL. And I look at Daryl Sutter coming in, and they mentioned that Goodrow could not play for Daryl Sutter when he came in. And his dad, after this weekend, when he reached the 100-point mark, said, I knew he would be the best fit for Daryl Sutter because of the way he was raised. He lived on a farm, and he appreciates the values that Daryl desires as a coach. So it's really important to, it's one thing to pick them, it's another thing to develop them. And I really think we've got to keep up on the development so much more than the selection. We have to be prepared for achieving potential and development that we can't imagine in today's youth players. So prejudging them and misplacing them, and I don't think there's such a thing as misplacement. It's just a case of making the most of what you got. That's all I've got to share.
So a great point, Wally. And, I'm kind of on the precipice of trying to decide which way to go with this, right? But like, the money best spent is on coach development. Like, that is really where, like, if you're going to put your money anywhere, you're going to put your time anywhere. It's the man, the woman, the whomever standing in front of those kids. If that coach is 10% better, I mean, that's the best use of my time and my resources, right? Versus, if you try to go through this whole standardized process and go through every team and make sure it's fair, and you allocate so much time and so much payment and so many hours to it, would you just be better off, sitting down and spending 2 hours with that coach and talking through their practice plan? And I mean, I don't know the answer, but it sounds like that is a wiser use of time and money than, allocating all of these resources to the coach selection. And I only say that because we're a massive animal and we don't have enough hands on the ground or people on the ground to do it all, right? So if I'm going to say, hey, like, for me as a consultant or the main person trying to create change, I can't do everything at 5%. I'd rather do one thing at 100%, right? So what's the best use, of my time and my expertise? I don't think that it is team or player selection or evaluation necessarily. So no, it's a great conversation. I'm glad we're having it, because it's definitely getting my brain rolling on a couple ideas for sure.
Kim, it's bang on, because Jordan and Tim are involved in observing that process, and I think they've overlooked the main part of it. It isn't about the player development; it's the coaches, how they're developing during that camp and what they're learning from it. And right now, if there's no discussion in evaluation, there's no interaction, there's no questioning and agreeing to disagree, there's no real learning going on. So I think they're overlooking coach development in that sense, relative to evaluation for development and what it means. And coaches are the ones that will develop them in the end. So it is all about coaching in my mind, and your best money spent is always on coach development. I think it's a great exercise. They're getting exposed to things, and I think having mentors around them to ask them questions and make them think deeper. And I know I've talked to Tim about some of the conversations he's had. They're huge. But that's coach development. And that's why in Alberta, with Barrie, mentorship process is part of coach development, because they're there to guide them in the process of growing themselves in terms of what they do. And at the same time, influence Barrie on what might need to be done. So good work, Tim. Go ahead.
Well, I totally agree, Wally, and that's why I had the discussions with Barrie about them missing out on a huge coach development piece in really not encouraging or mandating some interstaff discussions on players. I totally agree with that. And the other comment I might have is, yes, there's a big coach development piece, but, selection has to happen in some way, shape, or form. It's part of Mike's job. It's part of Kim's job. You can't just say, you know what, let's just throw darts and put players on teams. It's to the players' benefit to, like the Hawks, Eagles, and Falcons, Wally, it's to the players' benefit to be slotted into a situation that gives them a chance to succeed and develop and contribute positively to their team. So if you totally ignore the selection process and just randomly throw kids together, you got a kid that might be a duck out of water on a team, and they have no chance to develop because they're never going to touch the puck in a game. They're never going to have a chance to check a player at game or practice. Like, the selection process is extremely important for the players themselves. It's obviously important to the parents for different reasons, and I'm less concerned about the ego side of it from the parents' perspective. Like my kid's on the AAA team and not the AA team, or my kid, there's no way my kid is a level 6 player. My kid's a level 2 player. Like Mike is laughing because I know he hears that every day, every week, every year. So there
This
has
morning.
to be. Sorry, Mike.
This morning.
Yeah. So there has to be a selection process. There has to be, or needs to be, some effort put into it to do it the best way you can, so that, as Mike has been alluding to, you can actually give some feedback to the players and parents on, hey, this is why we feel your son or your daughter is better suited to be on the AA team instead of the AAA team. And if Gino Cavallini was here, I had a beer with him last week when he was here for the Max. He has a great story to tell about, I think, a U15, U16 level midget player who was a really small little guy but pretty skilled, whose parents, and his mom in particular, was adamant and extremely upset that Gino didn't put him on their AAA team. But Gino took the time to explain to them, it's like, hey, look, you know what? He's going to get the S kicked out of him in AAA. He's a skilled player. He needs to have the puck. He needs to be in a position where he can succeed. It'll be best for him if he plays U15 this year, and then we see him as maybe moving up next year, blah, 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 blah. So now the kid's a first-round NHL draft pick, and I'm not sure if he's where he's playing. He might even be playing right now. But the parents came back to him after the fact and said, hey, we really appreciate the approach you took with our son in putting him in an environment where he could succeed, because it obviously paid dividends. I mean, he got a full ride to a D1 school, first rounder, I think, playing in the NHL right now. So, you know, those are hard decisions sometimes. And there's always a really difficult decision, debate about, you know, does a skilled player play up to challenge himself, or does he stay back to further develop his offensive abilities? That's a tough question all the time, but you know, the selection process is important partly for that as well. Go ahead, Hal.
It's all such great conversations because it's so important for kids. And I think a lot of coaches or selection committees just kind of do it and walk away. I posted a link on the chat to a video I did with Blake Wheeler, captain of the Jets, and he did not do well in the 16s or 17 postseason process here in Minnesota. He did not make any of the national camps, but he himself has some great lines in there. And when we've had kids who are really disappointed at not making those levels, I've sent them a copy of this link to this video on YouTube. And the name of it is, if it's going to be, it's up to me. But one of the things that Blake says there, my hockey aspirations were not to make the 16 team or the 17 team. My goal is to play in the National Hockey League. Right? And he did this video with me when he was, I think he was at the University of Minnesota at the time. And so anyways, it's just there's a player saying, you know, what I realized when I didn't make those teams, I needed to get to work if I was going to get where I wanted to go. So it's just a good message from what turned out to be a very successful player who didn't have all that, you know, he wasn't the real deal. We call it the real deal down here. I had a dad tell me his Pee-wee kid was the real deal. He was the real deal, okay, but he never played any real hockey. So, anyways, it's all great conversation you guys are having. I've enjoyed it.
And I think, Hal, following up on that, and I'm not 100% sure of this, but I've heard tell of it, that in this process I'm in for the 14-year-olds in Alberta.
You want to know why hitting hundreds of balls on the range doesn't work for you?
Just a second here. Oh, sorry.
When you're trying to fix your slice?
Just one second. Okay, sorry. I just wanted to make sure I had that video queued up in YouTube to take a look at it, Hal.
Yeah.
In the same process.
Never has. And I know that's hard to
Jesus,
believe,
criminy.
but it's
Well,
true. Hitting range balls actually ingrain the
Commercial
wrong
on
habits
YouTube.
that are.
Here we go. In the same process in Alberta years ago, I believe Jerome McGinley was overlooked, and he was not in the top 120 players in Alberta. And enough said, just like Blake, you know. If you're, and that's where that character piece comes in. If you're bound and determined to keep working to get better, keep working on your skills, and give yourself every chance to get where you want to go, then even if you don't get there, you can at least look yourself in the mirror at the end of the day and say, hey, I did all I could do to get there, and it wasn't in the cards for me,